all alone on the internet, but you don't seem to forget about yourself.
Without any warning, we're sucking up the oxygen. The room is getting smaller. We always have it coming, like animals who like to bite, tasting our disaster. 20-something seconds go on and on. 20-something seconds go. I'm not ready for darkness. I'm not ready for darkness. I know we can do better. I'm not ready for darkness. If we promise to hold on and to never let go. I'm not ready for darkness. I'm not ready for darkness. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. I'm ready to absorb you, feeding all your triggered lies. My ignorance defines you. The roof is gonna cave in, roaring with some dinosaurs, so caught up in the moment. 20-something seconds go on and on. 20-something seconds go. I'm not ready for darkness. I'm not ready for darkness. I know we can do better. I'm not ready for darkness. If we promise to hold on and to never let never let go. I'm not ready for darkness. I'm not ready for. I'm not ready for darkness. I'm not ready for darkness. I know we can do better. I'm not ready for darkness. If you promise to hold on and to never let go, I'm not ready for darkness. I'm not ready for darkness. Hey, 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 hey. A significant light, just where it was needed, gleaming black as night, cloistered in injustice. Dead in the eye of time, nobody is losing. Faces merchant change, but your face remains.
Yo!
Yo!
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Saturday. Maybe it's morning, maybe it's evening. Thanks for hanging out with us. I am joined by Mr. Marco Russo, who has been grateful
Hello.
enough to join us today and answer some DAX questions. We're just going to hang out, Marco.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for keeping me in your, having me as a guest in your great channel. Thank you very much.
It's always good to have you, my friend.
Yeah, I just stole the place of Patrick. I hope that Patrick was here today, and too bad.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah. Patrick got some family stuff in Chicago he's taking care of. So he's in the chat though, folks. So hey, thank you, Ricardo, for becoming a member. I got new alerts set up. Yay. Awesome. All right. So if you're not familiar with Mr. Marco Russo, he is a co-author of the Definitive Guide to DAX. So be sure to get this book if you don't have it. It is amazing. Lots of good info. I'm sure that will come up multiple times during today's stream. So also go to their website. So Marco is co-author with Alberto Ferrari. They have a great website, SQLBI.com, so go check that out. Lots of great resources and tools and all sorts of great stuff for DAX and data modeling and what have you. So, all right. So, a couple housekeeping things. First off, thank you to all of the members of A Guy in a Cube. It helps support what Patrick and I do, and so we are very appreciative of your support and continued just helping us out. So thank you so much. And also, for those curious about how we do this live stream and everything that goes into it, this is the setup that I have on my machine. Patrick's is a little more simplified, but still awesome. And so we've got a lot of stuff. I know Kevin, I don't know if Kevin's in the audience today. He normally comments about the fact that he can't get a Go XLR, and I apologize for that. So I've got two. So all right, Marco, anything you want to add before we jump into all of these questions?
No, I mean, it's you already made a great presentation, and I just don't. I look forward to receiving questions. We received already something offline, but yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead.
And so we've got the questions are already rolling in. Also, again, thank you to my wife for helping queue up the questions. She is backstage doing that. Be sure to prefix it with a Q colon, and we will get those queued up. Please do not spam your question. Hey, Ankur, thank you for becoming a member. Hey. So please don't spam the question. We do get them queued up. We have a whole system for that. And then if you do continue to spam them, we will put you in a timeout. So just be warned. So, okay, I am one quick thing here. So we are, it's always technical. There it is. That's why. So that should be it. Go. Hopefully that clears up. It did. All right. So let's get into the questions. We did have a few member questions that were sent in beforehand. So we're going to start with those, and then we'll get to other questions that are queuing up in the chat. So the first one, and I think you have a fan, Marco. So let's let's go with Mr. Micah.
Yo, Marco. My name is Micah Dale, and I am a really big fan of your book. Second edition here. I bought the first one years ago. Love it. And everybody watching at home, if you don't have this book, go pick it up right now. The Definitive Guide to DAX. So my question for you, Marco, I've got some customers in finance that are interested in profitability analysis, go figure, and they really want to know the drill down of free cash flow and other profitability metrics. And in multidimensional, I would do things such as calculated members, where a user could drill down into free cash flow. I just calculate it on the fly and give it to them in a drill down. But free cash flow is not a category. It's not part of a account hierarchy. So how do I give users in Tabular the opportunity to drill down into free cash flow? Now, what's even crazier is in Excel, with a connection to a tabular model, I can use the OLAP tools to calculate a multidimensional calculated member, but I can never actually save the darn thing into the tabular model itself. So I don't know. What do I do? What would you do? You've got customers that are interested in drilling through profitability calculations. What do you do? I'm really interested in the answer, and I thank you so much for taking this question.
All right. So that was a good question.
Great. It's a great way to start this chat. And first of all, Mika, you should start getting a YouTube channel by yourself because it's amazing. Second, can you share the screen?
Yeah, let's jump over.
So that's so let's start with something. This is a study. So I try to describe the problem to people who may not know MDX and multidimensional. The basic idea is that if I have usually a parent-child hierarchy, but this could be true also for a regular hierarchy, but you know, it's harder to imagine you have a country, state, and city, and you can invent new states and new cities. That's the idea. But you might have regions that are actually aggregation of other regions, or in a parent-child hierarchy, you might add nodes in the hierarchy that actually are calculations over existing other nodes. And this is very, very common in finance, because you might want to have a report like the one that you see in my screen now. And here, this is a parent-child hierarchy. I have several metrics which are obtained with a classical aggregation over nodes. But if you pay attention, at a certain point, we have this area, KPI, where I have additional items that provide numbers that have been computed with DAX formulas using data of other nodes. You can do that today in Excel when you use a feature in Excel that allows you to create local calculated members for a multidimensional cube, because from the Excel point of view, the tabular model or Power BI model is still a multidimensional cube, and so Excel can try to do that, but there is no way to persist this calculation on the server, and there is no way to show this calculation to Power BI. But you see, this is made in Power BI, so how can I do this? This is actually a proof of concept, and it is just a study. We started more than 1 year ago to evaluate how to implement this in DAX. Problem is, this is a mess. Don't do that. Don't do this at home, because it is very slow, unmaintainable. But we had this study because we wanted to see whether with the calculation groups we wouldn't have been able to obtain the same result in a more maintainable way and with better performance. And so far, we don't have the expected performance to do that. And there are a few things in the calculation groups they had to fix. So maybe there's some, a certain point in the future we could reach that point. But the way we have to implement this technique is not so easy. So I don't want to go too much deeper in detail, and maybe I can answer to Mika offline about the details of that. The problem is that the calculation is very, very bad. The way we have to implement the calculation here is very, very bad. So the fact that this in some way works doesn't mean that this is something that you can put in production. This is working with a very small number of data. But if you're interested into that, we can, we could try to provide to Microsoft some feedback. We could create an idea and get votes and so on. So at the moment, there are no features to do that. This is the problem. I know. And if you really need this feature today, you should still create multidimensional cubes too, from my point of view. So that's the answer. Sorry.
That makes me sad.
I know.
But true. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, and then I think in Micah's situation, he's not going to be using a multidimensional cube. So.
I know. We will do this for multidimensional. I mean, we will do something for Tabular. As you see, we started this. We tried to implement this, and we provided feedback to the team. One day we will do that. One day.
It's getting there. Baby steps. Baby steps.
Yeah.
All right. Next question is from Michael in the Netherlands. Let's have a look.
Yo, this is Michael from the Netherlands. Here's my data model question. We have finished a proof of concept for a whole department reporting, and we built all of it on CSV files that are located on a SharePoint. Now we want to industrialize the solution. So my question is, how do we best plan and migrate the solution to a proper data warehouse setup? Thank you very much. Have a good day.
All right. So, you want to give your thoughts? And it's not really a Dax question.
I think. No, that's fine. It's we also do data modeling, and so that's exactly the question I like too.
Yep.
Let's see. First of all, I think I will create a relational database. I will store something like a star schema in the relational database, and I will put the data there so that at the end of the day, I don't have to do any transformation for the data in order to get the data in my data set. And so what you have now probably is as a proof of concept, you created the requirements of the data model. So you know what are the tables, the business entities, you know how you have to put the data in a way that it is easy to analyze. And then you have to do your homework with the ETL to transform the data. Unless you already have the data in a form that you don't want to change and you feel more comfortable using Power Query to do the transformation, maybe you can just do the transformation storing data in SQL. And the main reason for that, if you have financial data, you may want to do some validation of the data. And guess what? How do you validate the data? Maybe with a SQL query that does some of the reports that you also have in Power BI. Guess what? If you do this in Power Query, how do you query in SQL? And that's one problem that many people don't think about, but is an important thing to consider. Validate the data.
Yeah, and the other thing with that too is if you do want to use Power Query, you could look at something like Azure Data Factory and use those capabilities in Azure Data Factory to get that in. You could also look at data flows, but I agree having that, especially it sounds like it'd be for a larger set of data, then having that SQL database is a good source. And then it makes it easier for Power BI to just connect to that and do what it needs to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I take a look at Azure Data Factory. I think that would help you just from the ETL side of it and getting that data moved from SharePoint into SQL, doing some of those base transformations first, and then going from there.
Yes.
Yep. Good question. All right. Next question. This is we've got two more. No more video questions though. So sadly.
Okay.
Here we go. All right. So Andrew asks, wondering if you could elaborate on how to deal with being able to display date time fields in the report viewer's local time. There seems to be a lot of variation in the community over how to achieve this, even if it is possible. A lot of solutions hard code times to a particular time zone, but I'd like to be able to make it dynamic based on the user's location. So, yeah. So
here there are different problems here, and I think that a complete question will take half an hour. So we try to recap. First, Power BI doesn't have Power BI and analysis services in general. Tabular, you cannot store information about the time zone. So when you store the data, you store a daytime in any local time you want. The problem is if you have tracked the information in different time zones, probably the smarter thing you can do, depending on the kind of report you want to do. So if the report always has data in local time zone where you recorded the data, so the right thing to do is that you store the data with the local time zone where you recorded the data. At the contrary, if you have a website and you want to track the data of the website, and then we want to convert the data of the timestamp of the website to the local time zone of a particular country, do this at the reporting level. Even though it's complex. For example, we analyzed for a customer that tracked the calls made in call centers all around the world, and I wanted to analyze this. And so we had to do a very complex model where the data were stored with the original timestamp and in local time zone for different countries, with one column for each time zone, which is crazy.
That's bananas.
And yes, and so you have to investigate about, remember, Power BI is about reporting. And so you have to think about, what do I want to report? Do I want to report in a local time zone, or do I want to report converted to the local time zone something that has been recorded in an original time zone? This is critical. For example, if I have information about people entering into a store, guess what? I record the local time zone. I don't need to store the data in a global UTC time or something like that. There is no need to do that. At the contrary, if I have an event that happens in a place but could be originated by another place and I want to change the point of view, then probably it's better to store the data in the UTC, for example, and then do the conversion at reporting time, grouping the data that could have the same time zone stored in the time zone in another column.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
probably the best.
Bottom line, it's a mess. So
Yes.
it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, but it's the reporting problem. If you think about the problem, you don't have to store. People think about how can I store that? You have to store the data in SQL Server or your favorite database. But SQL Server manages this very well. But when it comes to reporting, you have all the problems of the world. So the idea is that you are forced to solve this ambiguity in interpreting the data when you created the model for the reporting in Power BI.
The other thing, part of that question though, is that he made it sound like he wants to do this at the report consumption time based on that users, and that makes it even more complicated. So what you're talking about is getting that set up in your data at the time of processing and refresh, and trying to do that on the fly for the end user. That's even more complicated.
The way we solved that was to create a column with each time zone of that could be consumed by the user. Because for performance reasons, this was the only the only way to do that. But it's expensive.
It is. So all right, good deal. All right, last pre-question that we got. This is from Christian. What are the trade-offs between using Power BI and SQL database? Oh, Burning Suit, thank you for becoming a member. So what's the difference between Power BI with SQL database as data source versus Power BI with Analysis Services Cube as a data source? I just arrived to a company who's using Analysis Services as the data source, and we're replacing the ETL processes. I'm wondering if I can bypass the cube and connect Power BI directly to the SQL Server database. Solution small, 7 to 8 million rows, and we only have 2 cubes. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
So I'm totally biased here. And the thing is, if you already have an Analysis Services cube, you don't have to lose that. Right. You have to keep the semantic model you have, and you have to just consume it. So in Power BI, you can create a live connection, which means that you don't import the data. You just query the model from your Power BI model, and Power BI sends DAX queries to Analysis Services. And it works for Analysis Services multidimensional or Analysis Services Power. It just works. So just use it, consume it. Now, I understand that in case you say, but I have a model in Analysis Services and I want to add the tables that are not stored there, what should I do? Okay, 2 potential answers here. Wait a couple of months and use the composite model with the ability to connect to Analysis Services, like direct query for Analysis Services is probably the best option. But in case you cannot, or there will be limitations that are not compatible with your requirements, another option you have is that you recreate the same data model in Power BI, or you push to the server, to the cube, the tables that you have. I assume that if you have a tabular model, it's easy, but if you have a multi-dimensional model, then you could be more in, yeah, good. You could be more in trouble, and you could try yes, for multi-dimensional, you could try to create a similar model in Power BI, but at that point, you should go to the source of the analysis services to create a tabular model that does the same thing. Right. But the thing is that if you can avoid that, and if you can try to get the data from analysis services, is better. And the main reason is that if you have analysis services, you already have hierarchies, measures, business logic. If you get the data, you lose everything of this. You lose all the additional metadata that you have. Why?
Yeah. The other things to consider too are, because you said cube, so whenever I hear cube, I assume multidimensional, not tabular. Although some people say cube with tabular as well.
Yeah.
It also implies that you're on premises, and so you got to think about gateway latency, things of that nature. So you could look at, hey, if we can move this, if it is tabular on-prem, maybe can we move to Azure Analysis Services instead, and or what Marco said about rebuilding in Power BI Desktop. So some of those are just things you got to weigh. I do agree. If you already have it in place on premise, then I mean you should be okay. The thing to realize also about just the future direction of Power BI is Power BI Premium is being considered as that superset of analysis services tabular. And so as new features come out, there may be things that are available in Power BI Premium that you just don't have in either multidimensional or tabular on-prem or Azure AS. So those are things to weigh into your considerations as well. So if there's something that you need that's only available in Power BI Premium and or tabular, then those may be considerations or factors that come into that as well. So lots of things to consider. All right. Now we can go back to the queue. And by the way, thank you, VJ, for the super chat, and thank you, Matthew, for becoming a supporter as well. So much appreciated. All right, you ready for this, Marco?
Of course.
All right. So Mohit's got a question. Is multidimensional model better than tabular? That's a loaded question. Wow. All right.
Oh.
I think I covered,
it depends.
Yeah, we covered some of that in the last question, right? So some of that depends on what you're trying to do. So
yeah.
So there are some.
So
yeah, go ahead.
I think that the problem is very simple. We can start a philosophical discussion about which one is better. Okay, and we can spend the entire afternoon and next night and go on. But the biggest question today is another one. Imagine you start a project today. So I imagine that you were talking about a company creating a project. We don't do this in our free time. We don't create multidimensional cubes or tabular models in our free time. I mean, I do that, but I'm crazy. Okay, so yes. You don't do that. So if you don't do this in your free time, we have to imagine that a company has to guarantee continuity over time. So you start a project today and you have to maintain this project in the future. And the biggest problem today, and I'm not joking, how do you find someone who knows MDX? Problem number one.
Big thing.
Problem number two, if you have someone who started today and you want to teach him or her MDX, you are in big trouble, because many of the resources that exist for MDX are just printed on a book. I probably have here, somewhere here, the only book that is good for MDX, and I think it's not available as an ebook, just to make an example. There are other books, okay? But if you really need something similar to the definitive guide to DAX for MDX, guess what? You don't have an electronic version, so it's out of print. There are no trainers today that teach. You can find something, but basically is a wonderful language, MDX, but is hard to learn. And if you think that DAX is hard, oh, you didn't try MDX enough. You don't know. It's very powerful MDX. You have recursion that you don't have in DAX. So from certain point of view, is from a technical standpoint, is much more advanced, but at the same time is much more difficult and also harder to manage. So the real problem is that we could all still love MDX and multidimensional. There are features we miss in Tabular. But if you start a project today, actually, there are very, very, very few narrow cases, like the one that I talked before, where multidimensional should be considered. Otherwise, probably you have to go to Tabular.
Nice. Yep. So I agree. I agree with all of that.
Yeah.
I remember...
And you see how I don't answer the real question, right? I didn't say which one is better.
It's very political of you. So I remember when I was in support, and like I didn't come in. I will be the first to admit that multidimensional is more of a black box to me. I understand Tabular, I understand Power BI, but multidimensional, I never really spent any time there. And in support, like there were folks there that did multidimensional support and had, I mean, their knowledge came from years of working with it. And I went in there and I'm like, it's going to take me so long to ramp up on that. So yeah, awesome. All right, let's see here. So VJ had a question. What are the best ways to debug DAX? Good question.
So I think that I think we have a video with Patrick. Huh?
Yes, we do.
Where the idea is the following. You don't have a debugger. And the day you have a debugger, you probably will be disappointed. Because if you think that the debugger is a way to understand DAX, think twice, because you could get very confused. Let me give you an example. I'm a developer, okay, so I'm used to Visual Studio and C# and C++, and I developed it in other languages in the past. More or less all the languages are the same. But now think about using, if you know functional languages, try to think to a debugger for Lisp. That's not that easy. And so if you don't know what I'm talking about, try to get some source code in Lisp and check that code with your knowledge of the languages that are procedural languages like C#, C++, or any other language, imperative languages. It's a different thing. So you need other tools. And more important, you need in DAX in particular, you need the knowledge of the concepts that are behind. That said, if you write DAX in a certain way and you follow certain best practices, for example, you split calculations in multiple variables, an easy way to debug DAX is to change the result of a measure returning an intermediate variable of your calculation. Okay, and one day we could have a debugger that shows you what you wrote, step by step. But the problem is, it will work if you cooperate. If you write the code in a certain way, if you write the code in a bad way, believe me, there is no debugger that will save you. No one. So try to first write good DAX code. And if you write the good DAX code, it's also easy to debug by just using DAX Studio or just Power BI, changing the return value of a measure, for example. And there is a video with in the channel somewhere. That you will find
Patrick, if you are, Patrick just put the video link in the chat. And
nice, great.
So the key point there is,
thank you, Patrick.
Variables are a great way to help you with debugging. So
yep.
So good stuff. All right, Chewy, it's got a question here. Will tabular models be able to handle hierarchies the same way as multidimensional cubes do? It seems like tabular model is not able to handle hierarchies with more than 10 levels.
No, this is not true. You can have in Tabular, you can have 63 levels like in multidimensional. The real issue is another. From a data modeling point of view, you can create as many levels if you want, but the problem is that you don't have a syntax in DAX to manage the notion of a hierarchy. So while multidimensional forces you to create a hierarchy, even though you don't have one, Tabular is the opposite. Tabular doesn't allow you to think in terms of hierarchies, even though you would like to do that. And so this is the big difference between these two semantic models and the languages, by the way. And it's curious that if you use MDX on top of a tabular model, you can use hierarchical calculations that you cannot use in DAX. But there is no way to call MDX from DAX, for example. So it's impossible. So I don't know. So but the problem is that if you have to do calculations over hierarchies, and these calculations are so important for you that you say, I'm going crazy with DAX, multidimensional is a good choice. It works. And it is reliable. I mean, it has been here for 15 years now. Long time. Is 10 years without big updates? And guess what? It's rock solid. There are no bugs. They fixed almost everything. Okay.
I don't know that I would say that.
For MDX is true. For the calculation engine is true.
Yeah.
For the for the calculation is true. I mean, there are no big issues in the there could be bugs as usual, but it works.
Yep.
It just works.
Yep. Cool. All right. Donald's got a question here. Any comments on the new composite models with analysis services or with Power BI? Announced at Embase, non-NDA, of course. So what Donald's referring to here is the updates for composite modeling with AS models and whatnot. I know Marco's very aware of it. So for those in the chat, this is the ability to say, hey, I want to connect to a Power BI data set or Azure analysis services, and then bring in like an Excel file right next to it, which is, as Marco tweeted during Embase, that is the holy grail of business intelligence. So what are your thoughts on that, Marco, outside of the holy grail comment?
I think I already said, I said in the tweet, I said game over.
Yeah.
And people said, oh, come on, it's not true. I said, look, I don't like to say that, but for many years, okay, because I worked for many years I worked in business intelligence, and this was a common requirement for the user. Oh, I have this nice report, but now I want to add this other table I have in Excel to do something. Mm-hmm. So the idea of being able to extend an existing semantic model, not just a database, a semantic model, and to combine two different semantic models together, nobody ever was even just close to that. Okay, not even close to this goal. And the idea of doing what has been shown so far in some demo, it's just amazing. Even though we don't do everything we have seen there, it's amazing. The idea that you can create a relationship between two semantic models, it's crazy. It's totally crazy. And I think that people don't realize the impact, the strong impact that this could have in the way we create models in the future and in the way we extend the analytical capabilities. And I think that the competitor of Microsoft don't realize the importance of that. Because this is a total game changer. It's totally amazing. And of course, it's still not in production. There will be bugs. There will be something that doesn't work as usual. Yep. But in 2-3 years, when other competitors will not have this feature and Microsoft will have this feature consolidated, when I say game over, I'm not saying game over today, of course, but if you think about the semantic model, it's a game over. Then we can discuss about Power BI doesn't create a good-looking reports. Okay, we can discuss for that, and I can say you're right. But the problem is, in terms of semantic models, I think that there is no competition today. Yep. And prove me I'm wrong. Yep. Prove me I'm wrong, because I want to see evidence for that. At the moment, I didn't see anyone announcing something even just close to that. This is crazy. That's the only thing I can say.
I agree. So it's going to be fun to see once it comes out. So for those in the chat, the public release wave, I did that for Alex, states that public preview will be in September. So stay tuned for that. It is coming Alrighty, Kendall's got a question. This is non-data model, non-whatever. I like the question. How do I fix architecture mismatch error between the driver 32-bit and the application 64-bit when trying to connect to an Odbc source?
This is for you. This is for you, Adam.
Yes. You need a 64-bit driver. So there's not there's really no, if it's a bitness matters, and if there's a bitness mismatch, you've got to fix that. So the gateway is 64-bit, so your Odbc drivers will need to be 64-bit. If you're working with potentially a driver that they don't offer a 64-bit driver for you, that's gonna be a challenge. So I don't know if you can't fake it and say, hey, pull from the 32-bit driver from a 64-bit gateway. So you're gonna have to fix that. Sorry, Kendall. All right, let's see here. Got go with all right, so Mohit's got an interesting question here. What's the difference between an app and a content pack? So content packs were the old Power BI packaging system for your content, so reports and dashboards and whatnot. Apps are the new approach that are available with the new modern workspace. And so content packs were available with the old classic workspaces. They've made some updates to apps to make it more similar to what content packs could do. One of the biggest features in content packs was that ability to basically create your own report off of, or copy a report off of what's in the content pack and personalize it for yourself. And so you can do that now with apps as well, assuming you have the permissions to do so. So, and then apps can also be created as a template app and then distributed on app source for other folks to consume outside of your tenant. So those are nice capabilities as well. So, right. Here we go. Adrian Chong's got a question for you, Marco. What is recommended CPU spec for tabular workloads above 3.5 gigahertz? So, interesting question.
Okay, I have the serious answer and the joking answer, not too much. Actually, the joking answer is more true. So the serious answer is that go on the spec, look for the CPUs that you can get for your server, and buy the one that has the highest CPU. Not just look at the turbo mode, look at the base clock frequency. You want that frequency to be as high as possible. Disable energy saving. I know, but for Tabular this is almost required. It depends. I mean, you can enable that, but you have to be careful. Sometimes I have seen that the energy saving mode was creating troubles for the performance, and that is the way to go. Now, the less serious answer is enter a chat of people who play video games, okay, and ask, guys, I want to get the best machine as a gaming machine. I want the best machine for gaming machine, whatever is better, especially for the, for the physics and the calculation engine, something like that. I want a, rock solid CPUs, cooling system, maybe overclock and so on, and get whatever they tell you. It's amazing. It's amazing. You start from 4 gigahertz, you go up, you have a fancy system with the water cooling for your CPU, and you can go to 5 gigahertz or more, and you see an increase in CPU in speed. But I know you cannot put that gaming machine on your server farm. I know, and sorry for that.
Yeah. Well, and also when you're looking at servers too, a lot of it comes down to, if we're talking on-premise servers, it's going to come down to multi-core, and then you get into NUMA node architectures and things like that. So yeah, the clock speed of your CPU is important, and you'll get more performance out of that from a single core perspective. But you also need to think about multi-core workloads as well, and what that's going to give to you. Yeah. So those are all factors.
Yeah, but my experience is that a common mistake I see in many setups is that they get a big machine that costs a lot of money. Then they create virtual machines, and so you have a penalty because you're running on a big machine that has a lot of cores with a lower CPU clock in each core, and then you get only a few cores because you run only the Tabular instance in one virtual machine, and then you might have also the multi-socket configuration but your machine doesn't actually need that, and so you get another penalty for that. So at the end of the day, it would be easy to say, come on, give me a dedicated server. It's a fraction of the cost, and it runs much faster.
Right.
But I know it's a complex politic to discuss in the IT department. So
yes, yes, it is. All right. So I see everyone in the chat latching onto Seth's question, saying this was a great question. So I'm going to throw that up there. Seth, thanks for being with us, buddy. So his question was, what are the top 3 biggest mistakes people generally make when using DAX?
That's a good question. So as usual, the answer is
sorry about that.
The answer is complex because it really depends on the person. So, for example, for new buys, the first problem, many people who approach DAX the first time, they confuse measures and calculated columns. Okay, this is the first problem: confusing measures and calculated columns. First one. And so using a measure instead of a calculated column or the opposite is very, very common. Second one is that assuming that the row context is the row in the report, which is not. So that's a second problem. And so this creates a lot of confusion also because the row context, now the documentation of Microsoft improved a lot. Okay, so if you look through the Microsoft documentation for DAX, is much better than it was 2, 3 or more years ago. And so now they finally introduced in the documentation the notion of row context and filter context. Problem is the error messages still don't provide any feedback of that. So what you have is that sometimes the error message is confusing. But if you search for these error messages on the web, usually you get some article that describe what they really mean. So there is a workaround for that. But for a new user, this is strange. I mean, you see an error message and you expect this to be meaningful. Sometimes it is not. And the third problem is certainly not realizing the impact of the context transition in an iterator. So that is I would say that the biggest problem, which is not a practical mistake that you do when you write code, but is something that is the biggest problem is that many people who approach DAX don't have any idea about what is the meaning of having a row context or a filter context, and how an iterator works when you have a measure in the middle. Just because you see a number that looks good, sometimes you're making a big mistake for either performance or correctness of the calculation, and you are totally unaware of that, and you can go in production with something that is totally wrong. The problem is that because the number, in certain condition looks good enough, and so you don't check whether the number is really the right one or not. And I think in general, this is the first problem.
I remember a long time ago, you and I were talking about this, and I think you made the comment to me, maybe you didn't, but I think it was you. You said once you wrap your head around like evaluation context, so the filter and row context, everything gets easier from there. Like that's probably the biggest hurdle of DAX out there. So Mark Walter also commented, too much confidence right out of the gate is a problem. Like, sure.
Yeah, it's a problem. I like to add one thing. So it's really true that DAX is about 3 concepts: row context, filter context, context transition. Okay, these are, and expand the table maybe, but these are the foundational concepts of DAX. You get them, you can write, and you can read that. You can write DAX, you can understand DAX. There is not much else. Then it's a question of practice, of course. So the speed that you need, the speed at which you write DAX and you solve the problem thinking in DAX changes over time, because at the beginning you are slower, and then over time with the practice you go better. And this happens in any language, by the way. Now, if I think about MDX, MDX is so complex that I remember when I was teaching MDX, after 3 days, we were just covered the foundational concepts. The explaining how the scope works in MDX, it requires a lot of time. Explaining how, there are concepts that are complex in their nature, is they are also hard to explain, because it's hard to draw how do you create an image of a multi-dimensional structure with hierarchies? It's crazy. It's hard to draw. It's hard to explain. Everything is hard. It's hard to imagine in your mind. And so I think this is the point. In MDX, however, you were immediately aware that if you didn't spend time studying something, you were going nowhere. You were just able to do a sum and a subtraction. That's it. Going beyond that level, when you see, oh, I have a scope, and you say, oh, a scope, what is this? What this equal to something? You were saying, what does it mean? And you needed to read documentation. Because DAX seems just an Excel formula, you say, oh, I can just write the formula. Come on, it's easy. And that's the problem. So it seemed easier at the beginning. In reality, there are a few concepts you have to learn, and you say, no, the overconfidence that Mark mentioned is actually right. I mean, it seems something I know, so I can move forward. Why should worry about the documentation? And that's where the problem starts.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so Brian, thank you for becoming a member. Much appreciated. And then Micah did a super chat. Thanks for that, Micah. So we'll throw Micah's question up there for Marco. My users don't understand the use of calculation groups, and I really don't want to create hundreds of measures. How do I help them?
That's a problem, because the problem is the following. I think that the biggest issue today is that the calculation groups are, first, not available in Power BI desktop from a data modeling perspective. Second, not supported in the user interface from a consumption point of view. And let me explain what I mean with this. Because calculation groups today are just another table with just another column that you can combine with everything you have in your report, conceptually this is very flexible. But then you approach an issue with a user interface that is the following. I want to create a simple report where I have the sales amount, the cost, the margin, and then I want to see the difference over the previous year just for the margin. That's a problem, because if I combine the calculation group using the year-over-year percentage, I get the three combinations. So I multiply by 3 measures. I don't want to do that. Is this a problem of the model? Not at all, because it's technically easy to create a query that only requests the combination of calculation groups and measures they want. But as of today, you don't have a way to do that in Power BI. And guess what? You have Excel, it just works. You create an image set, you create the combination you want, done. It just works. So what is the best environment to consume calculation groups today? Excel, guys. It's true.
Yeah, I know.
It's just true. I mean,
hopefully it gets better.
It's true.
Hopefully it gets better.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
We will publish other ideas. We will vote the ideas that I suggest you, so
Yes.
we can get something done.
Awesome. All right, Chris Wagner's got a question here. I have a dimension with 10 million plus cardinality where totals add up, but 13,000 records double the value when looking at the details. What would you do to troubleshoot this?
I think you have a wrong measure somewhere. If you double the value when you look at the details, the easiest the common error that generates this is that you have a measure somewhere that iterates over the fact table, and you use a measure iterating rows in the fact table, and the fact table has duplicated rows, and that is the easiest explanation. We mentioned this when in my training when I explain the context transition. I scare people with this example where I have a report and I have numbers that are bigger because I made the wrong use of the context transition, because I called a measure iterating a table that doesn't have a primary key. But the problem is, and the problem is the calculation. Then there is a second problem, which is the performance, because of course, if you made this mistake, you have two problems. First, the numbers are not right. Second, you have a big performance issue, a big memory issue. Third, I would add, if you have a dimension with 10 million rows, you, in any case, have a large dimension, so it will be better to find a way to, reduce the size of this, or if you have to keep it, consider having commonly used columns in a separate table or using aggregations. When we will have aggregations for Vertipack, we will remove this problem because we will have a good solution in the model. But as of today, we have to manage that.
Yep. Cool. Good deal. All right. Christian's got a question here. This seems a little complex. What is the measure in order to get the last available values, which should not be iterated by other filters? I don't want to get the last values for each product, but products on last report date.
Yes. So if I understand the question, you want to get the what's it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So okay, there is an article we have. Okay. So there are two DAX functions. There are two DAX functions that provide a value of the last date. You have a last non-blank, you have a last non-blank value. Don't use those functions because they are slower than something that you can write in DAX with just using a filter with a variable. And so let me check if I find the article. Last non-blank. Let me check. So semi-additive measures in DAX. So yeah, we have this article. If you switch 1 second there, this article we rewrote this article. This article was originally published in 2013. We rewrote this article last year, including the latest functions and the latest techniques. And we cover all the techniques here, all the possible variations, and we also discuss about the performance. And as you will see, for example, here, this is one technique where we basically find the last date according to your requirements, the last date where you have a transaction for every product, last date where you have the transaction for any product, and we apply this filter as a date and we do the sum. Yes, you write 4 or 5 lines, but believe me, this is much faster than anything else. Okay, I'm good. Nice. Just look at the text, the title of this article. You have the explanation here.
Yep. Yeah, Patrick, go grab that and stick it in the chat also for us while you're there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep. So Patrick's good for now. He's the link master.
Good.
All right. So good question there. Rishi's got one. What are the real differences in premium between consuming a data model as a shared data set versus as an AS cube? Should we be advising people? I don't know if that got cut off. So again, this goes back to a comment I made earlier. So Power BI Premium, the vision for that is that's going to be a superset of Azure Analysis Services. And so I would say if you're starting out new, today, there are a couple of factors that may prevent you from saying go premium versus Azure Analysis Services. The big thing right now is concurrency. And so in Azure Analysis Services, we can have read replicas, whereas in Power BI Premium, we don't have that today. So hopefully that will be coming, but right now that's the case. We don't have that read replica stuff. So if you have high concurrency, Azure Analysis Services may be the way to go. Also today, well, with Premium, with the XMLA read write, so that opens up some possibilities. But those are things to consider as well in terms of like calculation groups, things of that nature. I don't know. What else do you think, Marco?
If I can add one thing, create your model with Visual Studio or Tabulator. Then you can deploy on analysis services or on Power BI Premium. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. If you do that, what you should do today, so because you are free of the technology barrier, so of course, if you do that, you do not have to rely on a specific feature you have in either Premium or only analysis services. So because if you rely on that feature, then that feature could be gone. But from a data modeling perspective, there are not many differences. I mean, there are no differences at all. We have the same engine, by the way. And so if you do this, so if you have your semantic model built not with Power BI Desktop, but with Tabulator or Visual Studio, but you should use Tabulator anyway. And then you have something that is easy to move around. And so as of today, you need performance, and you needed to, you don't have many users, probably analysis services makes more sense. Tomorrow you enroll, you get Power BI Premium because it's more convenient for your user from a economical perspective. Then you say, oh, I already have the capacity. You can move the model there, and you shut down analysis services, for example, and you just change the connection point, so it's easy to move around. That's it.
So one other factor I'll throw in there too is that if you just have one large model, this isn't really a factor. But if you have a bunch of smaller models, Power BI Premium does some dynamic memory management for loading and unloading, whereas Azure Analysis Services does not. So that's another thing that may come into play. So, and then Mohit had a follow-up thing on this, which I thought was good. I throw out acronyms sometime and I don't explain. So he said, what's an XMLA endpoint? And so really what this is for Power BI Premium, you can connect to it with like an analysis services connection string. So that's really what an XMLA endpoint is. So it's a way I can programmatically connect to that data set, or treat Power BI Premium as like an analysis services server. So that's what that is. So for each Power BI Premium capacity, you can have that XMLA endpoint, and then just use that as an analysis services connection. So cool. All right. Let's go to... I had it and then I lost it. Here we go. All right. Vashnav has a question here. Is there any way to change the slicer filtering from AND logic to OR? I have multiple slicers, which when selected should filter the table using OR logic instead of AND. So my take on that is you could do that from a DAX perspective. So.
Yes, that's the point. Again, OR slicer, I'm checking which are the conditions. So these two articles here. So first, if you have two slicers, the default behavior is that you have an AND condition between the selections that you make in two slicers. So if you want an OR condition, what should you do? This is covered in this article. So you have an explanation here of the model, and basically you have to play in DAX in order to play with the filter context that can obtain what you want. Of course, you have to create the model in a particular way to do that, and there are different techniques to do that. Okay, but technically it is possible. You just have to figure out how to properly set up the model. You can download a sample file here that has everything. But sometimes you want to do another thing, which is if you do a multiple selection in a slicer, instead of doing the OR, so imagine that you selected two products. Okay, what you want to do when you select two products, you want to do an OR condition. You want to see any customer who made a transaction in either one product or the other or both. What if you want an AND condition? Again, you can do this in DAX because you can read the filter context, you can read the selection, and then you can apply the filter in a way that what you get is an AND condition. This was originally wrote for Power Pivot, so we don't have an example in Power BI here, but you have the example in Power Pivot. But guess what? You can always import an Excel file into Power BI, so you can import the Power Pivot model. It just works, and the formulas are explained here. It's not that difficult to create this code, so that's just covered here. So awesome. It's good. When I have the article, it's fine because I don't have to explain.
That's why we do those, right? So it's
because I forgot things, and I write articles because I tend to forget.
Remember one time I was searching for something, someone asked a question, I'm like, oh, it's good. I went and searched for it, and I found a blog. I start reading, I'm like, man, this sounds really familiar. And I realized, oh, I wrote it. That's why. I totally forgot about it.
Good.
So I tell people that my brain is a direct query connection, not an import model, right? So all right, Ramesh and Kyle, thank you for both becoming a supporter and upgrading membership. Much appreciated. So, All right, so the clock is running here. Damu's got a question. In DAX, using previous month in a calculation and using month as slicer and selecting non-consecutive months, any way to avoid the error in the return value?
So the question is, you want to go to the previous month of those that are selected, right? So it's technically possible to do that, because what you have is that you have to go. So first of all, you cannot use the standard time intelligence DAX function. I suggest you to do the following. First, create a column in your date table that has year and month as a consecutive integer number, which means that you multiply the year by 12 and you sum the month. Okay, the first thing. Second, you retrieve the selected value of the current month, and then you have to go to the previous one. The problem is, what is the previous one? Okay, the previous one is something that you can retrieve by using the filters function. The filters function, wait a minute. You have to get the filters function in all selected, or better, the values function using all selected. So you have to do calculate table values, the column that we mentioned, with all selected for the date table. This way you get the list of the months that are visible in your visual, because you selected only a few of these months. So you want to see only those that are visible. Now, you know what is the current one, and you know that the previous one is the maximum of the others. So if you filter less than the number you have, you get the maximum of everything else, which is a number. You get the number and you apply that number as a filter. So if we weren't so, if it wasn't so late, I would have typed it, but the idea is that you have to play with the filter context, all selected values, get the filters, search the last one in a variable, apply the result of this variable as a filter to the date, year, month number that you have.
Yep. So I also asked Patrick, he's probably hunting for it. It's an older video, Patrick, when we were in Manchester. So Patrick and Alberto did a video, which I think answers that question also, and Alberto had some examples.
Yes, probably right. You're right. Probably right.
So,
yeah.
So look for if you look for it's. I think it's the only video we did with Alberto right now. So if you find Alberto in the screenshot, that's the video you want to go look. So I don't remember the name of it. Maybe. Yeah. That was it. So, all right, guys, we are out of time. Marco, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Lots of questions as always. Yeah. So it was fun as always. And thank you for everyone in the chat that were helping answering questions as well. It's greatly appreciated. And Patrick got the link to the video in the chat. So check out that video.
Thank you, Patrick.
Alrighty, folks. We will see you next Saturday. Marco, good luck with your Power BI Days presentation that's coming up. What time is it going to be at? Yeah,
I go in Atlanta in 90 minutes.
90 minutes. All right. So Power BI Days.
Yeah.
I think Alex had put a link in the chat. PowerBIDays.com, I think, is where you can go get some info. They've got a bunch of presentations going on today. So check that out if you got nothing else to do. So, all right, Marco, stay safe, my friend.
Thank you.
We will see you next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.